Welcome to The Stacks, a podcast about books and the people who read them. I'm your host, Tracy Thomas, and I am thrilled to welcome Clint Smith to The Stacks. Clint is a staff writer at The Atlantic, a poet, and the author of How the Word is Passed, a reckoning with the history of slavery across America. We talk today about this incredible book, easily one of my favorites of the year so far, how traveling to physical locations informed Clint's storytelling, and what we gain and lose from the ways history is being taught in America today. The Stacks Book Club pick for June is The Undying, a meditation on modern illness by Anne Boyer. We will be discussing the book on this podcast on Wednesday, June 30th with Michael Denzel Smith. If you love The Stacks and want an easy way to show your support, please consider joining the Stacks Pack community on Patreon. You contribute monthly and earn perks like our virtual book club, shout-outs on the show, and discounts on merch. And I would not be able to make this show if not for the generosity of the Stacks Pack. So if you're interested in being a part of making this show happen week in and week out, head to patreon.com/thestacks to join. I'd like to say a quick thank you to our newest members of the Stacks Pack: Marie Hoda, Steph, H. Hayes, Sydney Bollinger, Camila Arnado, Natalie Tucker, Sarah A. Schaefer, Kelly Mormon, Miwa Messer, and Nina. Thank you all so much for your generosity and for making this show possible. Now it's time for you all to hear from the great Clint Smith. All right, everybody, I am very excited. Today I get to talk to author, poet, journalist, history teacher, recent PhD, all around awesome human, Clint Smith. So welcome to the Stacks.
It's so good to be here.
I'm so excited to have you. Your new book is How the Word is Passed. It is out now for folks listening at home. In about 30 seconds or so, can you tell us about your book?
So How the Word is Passed is about different historical sites throughout the country and how they reckon with or fail to reckon with their relationship to the history of slavery. So I go to places like Monticello Plantation, Angola Prison, the Blandford Cemetery, the Whitney Plantation, New York City, to try to examine to what extent are these places confronting, running from, or doing something in between with regard to how they talk about their relationship to that period of history.
How did you get the idea to frame the book in that way?
So in May of 2017, several Confederate statues were taken down in my hometown in New Orleans. So I was born and raised in New Orleans. Hurricane Katrina was my senior year of high school. So I actually finished school in Houston, but my family still lives in New Orleans. New Orleans is and will always be my home and a part of me in ways that I'm still discovering. And so these statues were coming down, statues to Robert E. Lee, Confederate General P.G.T. Beauregard, Confederate General Jefferson Davis, Confederate President, among some others that were sort of symbols of white supremacy. And I was watching from my home in Maryland and watching as these statues were coming down and thinking about what it meant that I grew up in a majority Black city in which there were more homages and more iconography and more symbols to enslaved people or to enslavers rather than enslaved people. And what are the implications of that? And what does it mean that to get to school, I went down Robert E. Lee Boulevard? To get to the grocery store, I had to go down Jefferson Davis Highway. That my middle school was named after a Confederate leader, that my parents live on a street named after somebody who owned 150 enslaved people, that whenever I went to on field trips to plantations around New Orleans growing up, nobody even said the word slavery, right? And so like, how does that happen in a city like this? And what does it mean that the sort of iconography of the Confederacy is so deeply entrenched in a city that was literally built by enslaved people? And so I started thinking a lot about who were the people in the city who were trying to tell a different story, and who were trying to push back against these sort of narratives that were so deeply entrenched in the sort of landscape of the city. And discovered, public historians and teachers and activists and scholars who were doing amazing work. And I started getting curious. I was like, well, what would this look like if I wonder what other places around the country are doing. Like I'm figuring out what New Orleans is doing. And I started thinking about what other places were doing. And so I kind of branched it out and I started going to different plantations and historical sites and cities and neighborhoods and houses and memorials and monuments across the city or across the country. And realized that, this country is such a patchwork of experiences, and in such a patchwork of stories, and that the story we tell about slavery is really inconsistent depending on where you are, and it largely depends on the sort of larger socio-political and historical realities that shape the community from which these sites are emerging. So it actually began as a poetry. I thought it was going to be a poetry collection. I thought I would write some poems about, like, each poem would be about a different monument or memorial in New Orleans, and that would be the conceit of the book. And then I realized that I think I needed some more room to sort of wrestle with these questions, and I also realized that this was a project that shouldn't just be in my voice, right? Like, it shouldn't just be my own meditations on place. Like, I needed to bring in conversations and reflections and perspectives from other folks, and I think that's when the book became the sort of modern iteration of what it is.
Okay, I wasn't going to kind of start here, but since you brought up your poetry, we are going to start here. So things have changed.
There we go.
One of the things I see a lot is, like, poets will write their memoir, right? Like, that's like a pretty common thing. And I'm curious about you writing sort of just a nonfiction history book. And I don't know, I'm curious about that. Like, I don't normally think of poets and nonfiction as being like, these things go together unless it's a memoir. So I'm wondering if that was difficult for you. I know, I mean, obviously I mentioned that you have a PhD. So, like, I know you are a writer in other forms, but I'm just curious how that maybe informed this book or didn't.
Yeah, I mean, I came to writing as a poet. And so poetry informs and animates every sort of writing I do. I again, when I first started thinking about these questions, when I first started watching these statues come down, both in New Orleans and across the country, and as this country was having a more robust conversation around the history and the historiography of slavery than I had ever seen in my lifetime, poetry is the thing that helps me sort of think through a question, and it has always been that. And so what I love about poems are the ways that they demand that you focus on something in the most granular, microscopic way, like focus on an idea or a moment or an object in a way that forces you to pay attention to it as both the reader and as the writer. You know, I mean, just, you know, if you're writing a poem about a leaf, you are forced to look at that leaf in ways that you might not otherwise, even if you've passed that tree that the leaf is on, you know, every single day of your life. You know, it demands that you pay attention in ways that I find helpful both as a writer and as a person. And so I thought I was going to sort of do this meditation on the monuments in my hometown. I mean, because there are hundreds of monuments of enslavers and Confederates and people who participated in the slave trade in various ways. And then I didn't want to focus singularly on that group of people, right? I didn't want to do a book about statues to the Confederacy. That didn't feel like the story that I wanted to tell. But what I did want to do was use that as sort of an entry point to think about this larger history, right? To think about this 250-year period of history that we are made to feel as if we talk about all the time. But in reality, we don't talk about it in any way that is commensurate with the impact that it had on this country. And that's part of the insidiousness of white supremacy, I think, is that it makes you feel as if you are talking about something all the time, or there's like slavery movies coming out all the time, or books about slavery coming out all the time, when they're relative to the impact that this 2.5 centuries had on our contemporary landscape of inequality. We don't actually engage with it in any way that accounts for that. So I wanted to broaden it out a bit. And I've spent the past several years just thinking about and engaging with and reading these books on the history of slavery and the history of inequality more broadly that have been really transformative for me. And part of what I just started to think about was, what would it look like to take the best of the historiography that I've spent time with and to go to places that embody that history, right? Like, you take a book like Annette Gordon Reed's The Hemingses of Monticello, which was, you know, when I read it, transformed my understanding of Jefferson, transformed my understanding of colonial America, transformed my understanding of the Hemings family. It was so important, and that's why it won, basically every award that is possible for a book to win. And I was like, well, what would it look like to take the best of the history that an amazing scholar like Annette Gordon-Reed has written, and then to go to Monticello and to describe what it feels like to stand on that land, to describe what it feels like to stand in that house, who are the people who are telling that story, what do their voices sound like, what do they look like, what are their backgrounds and their experiences, and how do their sensibilities shape the way that they make sense of and tell this story, and who are other people who are coming to these places who might have a very different set of life experiences and sensibilities that inform how they experience that land. And so I wanted to bring as much emotional texture and human texture and sensory details and combine it with this sort of reporting and the history to create something that felt dynamic. I wanted to write a history book that felt like a narrative journey. I wanted the reader to feel like they were on these tours and in these places alongside me. And to do that, I had to take the best of what I've learned from poetry and honestly the best of what I've learned from fiction and some of my favorite novelists who create these three-dimensional characters who give you a sense of like who they are physically, who they are emotionally. And I wanted to do the same thing with the characters who appear in my novel to the best, not my novel, my own book to the best extent that I could.
Yeah. One of the things that you brought up that I had to stop reading the book a few times to vent to my husband about was sort of the ways that the history of slavery has been like minimized or defanged a little bit or sort of neutered, or I don't know, whatever analogy you want to use. And reading your book made me feel a lot of rage. Like I was really upset reading your book. And I like to think of myself as someone who knows more of the history probably than like the average person. Like, I'm interested in the history of slavery and of America, but I'm not like a full-fledged, scholar. But I was getting upset about how the ways that we've been taught about it, like how we've disassociated from so much of the violence, and even the ways that we talk about the violence is like, oh, slaves were whipped, but like we don't really talk about like what that means, right? Like what 30 actual lashes on your actual bare skin would actually feel like and look like to someone who's being forced to watch it as a warning, like those types of things. And I'm just wondering for you, as you dove really deep into this stuff, what came up for you? What sort of feelings or emotions or maybe that were surprising or that you expected?
I mean, one of the things that I loved and appreciated about this book was, the nature of a narrative nonfiction book that is based on, in which the conceit is like going to different places, is that I actually wouldn't know what I was going to encounter until I got there.
Right.
And so, I had spent years reading books on the history of slavery and felt like I had a pretty good understanding of that history. And then it's a completely different experience to I think read. It's ironic because I've written a book, but like to read about a place and then it's to go to that place, right? Like it's one thing to read about what happened, the separation of families or how many children died in infancy during slavery. And then it's another thing to go to the Whitney plantation and to like stand in a place that has walls surrounding you with the names of and dates of children who passed away in Louisiana. It's one thing to read about a dozen people living in a single cabin. And it's another thing to like physically stand in that cabin where entire families, multiple families were forced to live, to see the way that the sunlight crept in through the cracks in the wood, to see the way that the air, on cold days would come in through those same cracks, and to imagine that people had to sleep in this place, regardless of what the weather or the conditions were like. And so, again, part of what I wanted to do was to create that sort of sensory experience as much as is possible through literature. And I think I was just surprised by how, even when there was something that I knew intellectually, how different, how much more profoundly it impacted me, like in my body, to be there, and to walk across this land, to be at, I've been thinking about, for example, mass incarceration for years. My dissertation in college is around the relationship between education and incarceration. But like nothing can prepare you for going to the largest maximum security prison in the country, where 75% of the people held there are black men, 70% of them are serving life sentences. That's 18,000 acres wide, bigger than the island of Manhattan. That used to be a former plantation. And to see men working for virtually no pay, working in fields of what used to be a plantation while someone stands over them or sits over them on horseback with a rifle over their shoulder, or to go to that place and to consider what it means that place has a gift shop,
right?
And has a museum that doesn't say anything about the history of slavery. And that in that gift shop connected to this museum, they have, there was a mug that had the silhouette of the front gate of Angola. And there was the silhouette of somebody standing on top of the gate, of the watchtower at the top of the gate. And you can see the silhouette of their gun. And above and below the mug is written Angola, a gated community. As if to make a mockery of what is happening in that place today, not even in the past, right? Like, but today, you go to Germany and some of these death camps and concentration camps have been turned into museums, and they have, restaurants and gift shops. But they're done. I haven't been, but to the extent that I understand, they're done as tastefully as possible, and also people still aren't there, right? Like it's a fundamentally different thing when you go to a museum for a prison that still houses thousands of people. Right. And then not only to have that gift shop, connected to that museum where the average sentence is 83 years, but then to not at all address the history that makes a piece of land like that possible. And then further to have those sort of, these things that people purchase in a gift shop that are almost making fun of or making light of, like what is actually happening in that prison. So when you ask like what was I surprised by? I think I was in some ways like surprised by my capacity to be surprised and shocked. Sure. Like I kind of, as much as I've always understood mass incarceration and prisons as being horrific, violent places, it was something very different to be in a place like that. And to experience the profound failure of reckoning that is reflected in sort of every part of that prison. Yeah, that was, I think, the most frustrating chapter in the book or section of the book. At least for me, I was like, I'm going to punch someone. But you're right. I was fortunate to visit the Whitney plantation, and I had a similar experience of like, I know what this is going to be. Like, I know how to prepare myself. And like, I might be the only Black person here. Like, I know that this is going to be a certain thing. And then I got there and I was like, almost not embarrassed, but almost like disappointed in myself that I felt so many things because I had like prepared myself to go in and like observe this place. And I was really, moved by it. And I think you really touch on sort of some of the reasons why and the way that the Whitney approaches everything. And, I don't want to spoil the book, but it rained a little bit when I was there. And as we were walking past the like little slave cabins that they have out there, the guide was like, just be careful because sometimes when it rains, there's snakes. And I had this moment of like, oh my God, these people are living in these tiny houses and there's all these scary snakes. And like, I'd never thought about snakes in slavery, like there's like these little things when you're physically there that all of a sudden you have to reckon with in a way that you can only imagine and probably fail to imagine so many of the details. And you also talk about that a little bit in the book. You have this one sentence, was like a sort of
mind-blowing moment for me. In my notes, I put a little mind-blown emoji next to it so I could remember what it felt like, because that's the kind of poetry that I work with.
Love the original mind-blown emoji.
Was that I never considered the fact that the history that we hear about from people who were formerly enslaved was so much people who were quote unquote extraordinary, people who had escaped, people who had somehow been able to buy their freedom, who had these extraordinary stories that were unlike what everyday ordinary enslaved people experienced. And I don't know. I just wanted to say that out loud because it just was something that was really, I think the question is, I think I do have a question. The question is, what do you think, as someone who, you know, studies history, teaches, what do you think would be fundamentally different about America, American history, American education, if we were taught history through a Black/enslaved person lens, or even just through a more inclusive lens that was more honest about what happened? Like, what could be different? What would be different?
Yeah, I'm really glad you brought that up. I mean, so to the first part of what you were saying, I think that's a sort of realization that I had as I was writing the book as well. Because like many folks, I had read, you know, Narrative of the Life of Frederick Douglass. And
Right.
Many of us have read the story of Harriet Jacobs, and you hear about the legend of Harriet Tubman, and we're sort of inundated, not frequently enough, but to the extent that we have discussions of slavery in school, they are focused primarily on like a handful of formerly enslaved people, the vast majority of whom, I'll say, are people who escaped to freedom, are people who tended to live in some of the northernmost southern states, and who, because of the nature of their circumstances, whose lives don't necessarily reflect the millions of people who were enslaved, right? So like when we read the Narrative of the Life of Frederick Douglass or any other book about Douglass, I mean, and like, you know, David Blight wrote what is probably my favorite biography of all time, his Prophet of Freedom about Frederick Douglass, like extraordinary book. I've read every Frederick Douglass autobiography and memoir. So I think that Douglass is, you know, as many scholars are now saying, like perhaps like our original founding father, right? Like to the extent if we're going to like use that framing,
Right.
Even if, you know, obviously it has its own sort of gendered issues embedded within it. But like if one was going to use that framing, I think it would be more honest to talk about Douglass as a founding father than perhaps any of the current founding fathers that we have. And so he's deeply important, but Douglass like wasn't a regular person. You know what I mean? Like,
right.
Like not even like a regular enslaved person or formerly enslaved person. Like there aren't many human beings in human history like that man.
Right.
You know, like
Right.
and so the idea, like most enslaved people didn't learn to read and write. One,
Right.
most enslaved people didn't live in Maryland, right? So like had a proximity to the North that would allow them to escape in the ways that Douglass did. Most were not teenagers fighting their slave breakers and like physically domineering them and then to the point where like that person would never beat them again. You know, most of them did not go on to be, you know, one of the best writers and speakers that this country has ever known. So, you know, and so his life can tell us certain things about slavery that are really important, but they also don't reflect the experiences, again, of like the vast majority of enslaved people for whom resistance didn't necessarily look like escape to the North, didn't necessarily look like fighting a slave breaker, but whose lives reflected the sort of like daily ways and attempts to like create and maintain a sense of personhood in the face of just unfathomable circumstances, you know? And like that is enough. And like that is, as much as we should celebrate and study the life of a Douglass and a Harriet Tubman and the like, we shouldn't forget that those are not the only enslaved people whose lives are worth considering.
right,
or whose lives are worth studying. And that's why I think the Federal Writers Project, that I've written about a little bit in the book and that I've also written about for The Atlantic, which is a sort of New Deal era program from 1937 to 1939, where over 2,300 interviews were done with formerly enslaved people who were still alive in the late 1930s, right? Which is another,
right.
another
That
thing
makes
about
me
how
so
recent.
mad.
I mean, and so and then these are people who are alive in the late 1930s, and so they were children,
right? But they had to be old
abolition.
enough to remember.
Right.
It's such a small.
It's so
sliver.
recent, and so so those stories have their own issues and their own limitations, which scholars have talked about. They were done by the interviews were conducted by white writers and interviewers who often carried their own biases and often projected sort of narrow conceptions and stereotypes of blackness and authentic black speech onto these individuals and reflected that in the transcript when that might not necessarily have been the reality. But they still are really valuable because they give us a sense of like how enslaved people experience the institution of slavery outside the context of the autobiography of Frederick Douglass or Harriet Jacobs or Olaudah Equiano. And to your other point, it reminds, the Federal Writers Project documents remind us again, like how recent this was. Mm-hmm. I think all the time about how the woman who opened the National Museum of African American History and Culture in 2015, who stood alongside the Obama family to ring the bell that sort of signaled the opening of this museum that was generations in the works, that she was the daughter of an enslaved person.
Wow.
Right? Like not the granddaughter, not the great-great-granddaughter, that woman who was still alive in 2015, her father had been born into slavery. Mm-hmm. I think all the time about my own son, who's almost 4, and I think about him and my grandfather. And I think about my child sitting on my grandfather's lap. And I imagine my own grandfather sitting on his grandfather's lap. And I'm reminded that my grandfather's grandfather is somebody who was born into bondage. And so this history we tell ourselves was a long time ago, wasn't that long ago at all. There are people who are still alive today who loved, who were raised by, who knew, who had relationships with and connections to people who were born into slavery. And so the idea that this institution that existed in this country for 250 years and that we've only been out of for 150 some odd years. So this institution that existed for 100 years longer in this country than it hasn't, the idea that would not have any impact on what the contemporary landscape of inequality looks like is so profoundly morally and intellectually disingenuous.
Yeah.
That and it has to be taken seriously. And this is why things like the 1619 Project, and this is why things like these moments that demand that we take seriously the way that the history of slavery has shaped every facet of our social, economic, and political infrastructure that exists today, whether it be contemporary wealth disparities, whether it be the Electoral College, whether it be gerrymandering, whether it be, you name it. It has been informed by the history of slavery. So, that became one of my obsessions in writing this book, was just reminding the reader, but mostly reminding myself that this wasn't that long ago. And in the scope of human history, like this was 2 seconds ago. I just did, last thing I'll say on this is that I just did an event with John Green, who has like a wonderful new book that's come out. And he has this essay. It's like a bunch of brief essays, and the conceit is that like he reviews these things and like random things in the world, like Canada geese and Mario Kart and salad dressing, like provide and does like a rating on a 5-star scale. And it's pretty cool. And one he did was on Halley's Comet. And he said something that we should consider is that because I think Halley's Comet comes around every 87 years. I don't know the exact number, but something like that. And he was like, something that's worth considering for us, like as humans, is that we are only 2 Halley's Comets away from removed from the emancipation of slavery. And I thought that was such a fascinating and helpful framing because like the Earth has existed for
many Halley's Comets.
Many Halley's Comets, right? There have been a whole lot.
A lot.
And we are only 2 removed from the institution of intergenerational chattel bondage in this country. Right. And so, yeah, I think it's essential that we remember how recent this was. It really was just yesterday.
Valentine's Day is upon us, and I've got love on the brain. Love for books. Duh, of course. Hello. Did you forget what podcast you're listening to? I love bringing you all great reads, exclusive author interviews, and behind the scenes book gossip. But I can only do that with your support over on Patreon and Substack. Our Stacks Patreon community, also known as the Stacks Pack, is where you can go for book club meetups, a private, very active Discord, and a year-long mega reading challenge to help you achieve all your reading goals. Plus, you also get that monthly bonus episode. Now, over on the Substack, you can subscribe to my newsletter, Unstacked, where I keep the book conversations going. I also give you a healthy dose of sports and pop culture, definitely some hot takes happening over there. And again, that bonus episode. If you don't have a few dollars to spare, don't worry. There are free options on the Substack and the Patreon to get you a little extra Stacks magic. Making this podcast is a total team effort, and by supporting my Patreon and my Substack, you allow me to support my amazing team that makes the show possible every single week. So if you or your friends are looking to meet other book lovers and support this indie podcast, come hang out with me on Patreon, Substack, or both. I would love to have you. And since we're talking about love, you can gift subscriptions to the Patreon and the Substack for that special reader in your life. For the Stacks Pack, head to patreon.com/thestacks. And for the newsletter, head to traceythomas.substack.com. And also, there are links to both in the show notes. Okay, see you in the Stacks. You just said like 50 things that I want to follow up on. I'm not going to be able to, but I'm going to try. One thing is that in Isabel Wilkerson's book, Cast, she talks about how it's not until like 20 something, I can't remember the year, it's like 2145 or something, that we will be as far removed from slavery as, that's not the right year, but it's like she does the math on either side. And I was like, wait a second, I'm not even going to be alive then.
I know.
And that was crazy for me. The other thing that I want to touch on is you're talking about the ways that slavery has informed parts of our history. And I'm reading Carol Anderson's new book, The Second, and it's all about the Second Amendment, but it's framed through anti-Blackness. And it's just, I mean, she's freaking brilliant. Like, I'm not saying anything new to anyone who's ever read a sentence of hers, but this book is really special because she's taking these moments from history, from, as you mentioned, the aforementioned founding fathers. She's taking, the Constitution and all that. But now she's also talking about the attacks on Black communities in the early 1900s and all this stuff. But it's all informed through slavery and the ways that they approached writing the Second Amendment because of Black people. And to see it laid out this way. And now I'm now at Trayvon Martin. That's where I am in the book. I'm almost done. And to draw that connection to, Alexander Hamilton, everyone's favorite rapping founding father. Don't get me started on that musical. I take a deep breath. But it's just so fascinating. And then the last thing that I do want to touch on, and I'm hoping you just have advice for me personally. It's not the last thing. The last thing I want to touch on about the things you said before is that my father was very old. He was born in 1935. He's since passed away. And I've always wanted to trace my family lineage, but I get stuck at his parents. So I'm wondering if you have any advice for Black people like me who want to trace our families. You're a historian, so I'm just asking you in the hopes that you have answers. I know it's not really your job.
No, I mean, it's a really interesting thing for Black folks in this country, because the first census to include Black people in it wasn't until 1870. Yeah. Right. And so that is the extent to which many Black Americans, that is as far back as they can go. And beyond that, you're sort of piecing together documents from a range of different sources that might give you insight into, whether it be newspapers or whether it be obituaries or whether it be, and I know I haven't done so yet, but I know that some folks have found answers through Ancestry.
I tried that. Useless.
Oh, didn't work? Oh,
No.
man. 23andMe?
Tried it. I
Didn't
tried
work.
all the easy things. I was hoping there were like harder secrets that historians might know.
I mean, I'm not a genealogical expert, but I know that there are people who, you can work with to figure it out. I mean, what we need to do is get you on Finding Our Roots. We need to call Skip Gates and figure out how to,
Are you friends
how to
with
get you on
him?
that show.
You went to Harvard.
I do not. I've met Skip, but I wouldn't say we're friends. He's but his scholarship has been so important for African American studies and for Black folks in so many ways. But it's hard. I mean, you look around and you see see my friends who are like able to trace their families to 13th century Scotland and 15th century Italy, and we're sitting here being like, to the extent that when I say my grandfather's grandfather was enslaved, that's based on documents that like my aunt has like put together and sort of, and it's an inference that we have. I mean, based on like when he was born, where he was born, and the sort of this one document that we have of this man, white man who was in the same county who shared the last name. So we think the last name was Pat, and then we think we can make out this name on this, yellow parchment that's like all broken down. So you're like zooming in as much as you can on the screen.
Right.
And yeah, I mean, that's the story of Black life in this country is looking for history and looking for your history and just finding dust.
Right. And it's like probably there. We just don't even know how to look for it. Cause like I have a friend, a white friend whose family owned humans in Virginia and they have their records. And it's like, well, if I knew where to look, I might be able to find something, but like I can't. And then they have all this shit. They're just sitting on like people's histories and lives and like, just so frustrating. And speaking of people who own people, this is a very good segue. I want to talk about Blandford Cemetery briefly, which is it's a Confederate cemetery in Virginia. It has the most Confederate remains in the country.
It's up there.
There.
It's one of the biggest.
One of the big boys. This is like a very crude way of asking this, but what the fuck is wrong with us that we have these cemeteries? Because I just can't imagine French people having cemeteries to the Nazis. Like these were our enemies. So that's part one of my question. And then part two is, why are people who still celebrate the Confederacy? And I couldn't get this answer from your book. I tried to glean it from the guys you were talking to, but I just couldn't quite figure it out. Why are people who still relate to the heritage of their families and whatever and being Confederate, why are they so obsessed with also wanting to be American? Because that was also their enemy. And I just cannot make the jump in logic between we celebrate this thing, whether or not it was about slavery to them, whatever. I'm not going to argue with people who don't want to have a serious conversation. But my confusion is around, if you're on team A and you're obsessed with team A, then how come you even care if team B likes you or not? Like, that's none of your business, right? Like, I just can't make that make sense in my mind. And I'm hoping that you can. Yeah.
So for context for folks, the Blandford Cemetery is one of the largest Confederate cemeteries in the country. The remains of over 30,000 Confederate soldiers are buried there. And I went there for the Sons of Confederate Veterans Memorial Day celebration. And so, as you can imagine, I was very conspicuous.
I was imagining. I was like, what the fuck was that like?
It was so it's interesting. I actually went, when thinking about genealogy and lineage, I went with the only way my wife would let me go is if I went with my white friend, whose name was William. And so William went with me to this place for this event, and he was on his sort of own journey of having done some sort of genealogical work and realized that his ancestors were part of the Confederacy and that they owned enslaved people. So I think that we were both coming to this place and this moment, attempting to sort of make sense of what it meant in a contemporary way, but for sort of different reasons. And so, when I was there, what became clear to me as I had these conversations with these neo-Confederates and these Sons of Confederate veterans was that history, for many people in this country, history is not based on empirical evidence. It is not based on historical record. It is not based on primary source documents. It's simply a story that they tell. And it's a story that they've been told. And it is this heirloom that has been passed down through their families and through their communities that give them a sense of lineage, a sense of purpose, a sense of value that allow them to situate themselves in the historical arc of this country in ways that feel suitable and in ways that feel that give them a sense of pride and affirm their the value that they have gotten from the stories that they've been told by their grandparents and great-grandparents and great-great-grandparents. And, part of the insidiousness of white supremacy is that it takes an empirical statement, like the Confederacy was a treasonous army whose existence was predicated on maintaining and expanding the institution of slavery. And it takes a statement like that and it turns it into an ideological one, right? The one that is seemingly representative of my politics or my ideological disposition, when it in fact is one that's just based on the historical record and one that's just based in truth, and one that, you look at the primary source documents, you look at the declarations of Confederate secession, and you see that these folks said it for themselves. Like they weren't unclear about why they were seceding from the Union. A state like Mississippi said in 1861 in their Declaration of Secession that our state is thoroughly aligned with the institution of slavery, the greatest material good in the world. Right, like that's the sort of essence of what that statement said. Or Alexander Stephens, who was the vice president of the Confederacy, who talked about in his famous 1861 Cornerstone speech how the inferiority of the African and the perpetuation of chattel slavery was the cornerstone upon which this new nation would be built. And then the interesting thing about Stephens is that after the war, he said that in 1861, and then after the war, and this gets to the second part of your question. The war is over. It's 1865, and he is writing his memoirs, and people are asking him about the speech, and he's like, "I never said that." And they're like, "What do you mean? We were all there. It's like recorded in the newspapers. We heard you say that slavery is the cornerstone upon which the new nation would be built." And he's like, "No, I never said anything like that. Like, what are you talking about?" And that's the sort of beginning of this sort of lost cause mythology, in which is this sort of late 19th century gaslighting, where basically, and we see it happening today. We see it with regard to the election. We see it with regard to January 6th, where people are telling you that something you saw isn't actually what you saw. Right. And that something they said isn't actually what they said. And it has profound implications for the type of society that's built. And so, when they're saying, emphasizing their Americanness at Blandford, I think part of it is because there was a recognition that they wanted to, I think it was clear to them that slavery would be, because of the way the war went, that slavery was going to be remembered historically as this like horrific, brutal, indefensible practice. And so part of what the Lost Cause attempts to do is to say, one, the Civil War wasn't about slavery. Like, what are you guys talking about? What do you mean? Again, even though all of their declarations of Confederate secession said that they were seceding from the Union because of slavery. And then two, that even if the war was about slavery, slavery wasn't even that bad in the first place. Like Senator John Calhoun of South Carolina had once said, slavery is a positive good for both black people and white people alike. And that it was a sort of civilizing institution, as historian Ulrich B. Phillips would write in the early 19th century, that sort of gave black people it civilized them in ways that could have never happened in Africa. And so they moved toward, they told these lies about the cause of the war and the origins of it, and also attempted to move immediately towards reconciliation without any sort of reckoning or honest accounting for what happened. But in part because they knew that the only way they would be let back into government is by sort of emphasizing the Americanness and sort of playing down the dispute, like where during the war they, so many of them wanted to be understood and recognized as a different country. I mean, we don't have time to get like into the weeds of the Civil War, but Britain and France were on the verge of recognizing the Confederacy as a country, and on the verge of siding with them, in part because of their relationship to the cotton industry and the need for the textile infrastructure in those European countries, and how much they relied on cotton coming from the South. But like if Britain and France side with the Confederacy, that changes the dynamics of the war in a fundamental way. And so they wanted to be recognized as their own country. And then after the war, they didn't want to be understood as having attempted to form their own country. And they wanted to say this was American versus American. We were just fighting to, for our respective states and to our families. And they started calling it the War of Northern Aggression. And as Jeff in the book says, one thing he says is that if they didn't come down and bother us, nothing would have happened.
Right, of course, Jeff.
And I'm kind of like, you're right. And I'm like, well, nothing would have happened for who, right? I mean, like, he was like, nothing would have happened and everything would have been fine. And I was like, it most certainly wouldn't have been fine for the 4 million enslaved black people,
right,
in the South. So yeah, I mean, I think all of it is an attempt to run away from and remove themselves as much as possible from the idea that they ever wanted to be a separate nation from this country, and to rewrite history to say that it was this thing that was like brother against brother, American against American. And it's not to say that in some instances the Civil War didn't split families up,
sure, but
it is to say that again, these were people who were trying to build a nation that would have extended and perpetuated slavery for decades and decades longer, likely into the 20th century, and that is not what they wanted to be remembered as having done.
Yeah, and you're a sports person, right?
I am.
It's like that quote that I think it's the coach of the Bears, or it's about the Bears, where he's like, they are who we thought they were, and we let them off the hook. And that's what happened. Like, the Confederate people, they were exactly who they said they were, and we let them off the hook. And by we, I don't mean us. I mean the white people who could have, like, enforced some, punishments, reparation type vibes. It's just so frustrating, because it's like now we have to have these stupid conversations that are in bad faith because people didn't just correct the record in the moment. Like, you could have just been like, hey guy, and we still have the same problem now. Like, Trump constantly telling people things that he said on the record were things that he never said. And people are like, yeah, he didn't say that. I'm like, well, why am I watching a video of him saying that?
Exactly.
It's just like the same bullshit.
And it has huge implications for the world we live in today, right? Like, it's not just this sort of like annoying gaslighting mythology. I mean, there was a Southern Poverty Law Center study in 2018 that showed that only 8% of U.S. high school seniors were able to identify slavery as the central cause of the Civil War. Like 8%. And so if you have an entire generation of young people who don't understand the centrality of slavery to the Civil War, and who fail to understand thus the centrality of slavery to the history of this country, then you have and this goes back to our conversation about people understanding, one, how these sort of economics of slavery made the United States into a global economic superpower. As David Blight, the historian at Yale University, writes, in 1860, the 4 million enslaved black people were worth more than every bank, factory, and railroad combined. Right. Like, worth more than all of the manufacturing capacity of the country in 1860 were the bodies of enslaved people. And so the U.S., enslaved people were very clearly the thing that helped create the United States or make the United States into a global economic superpower. And so there's that. And so you fail to understand how the economics of slavery created the contemporary, not only American economic landscape, but global economic landscape. Right. and then you fail to understand how recent it was. And I think and then you fail to understand how a war in which 700,000 people died, was most centrally about that question. The confluence of all these things together means that you will have an entire generation of young people who look around this country and who fall into the trap of believing that the reason one community looks one way and another community looks another way, the reason one part of DC looks one way or another part of DC looks another way, the reason one part of New Orleans looks one way and another part of New Orleans looks another way, the reason one part of LA looks one way, another part of LA looks another way, is because of the people in those communities, rather than what has been done to those communities generation after generation after generation. And, James Baldwin has this great essay called A Talk to Teachers. It's not one of his more famous ones, but it's one that's impacted me a lot. And he wrote it in 1963. I think it was published in 1964. It was based on a speech that he gave to a group of New York City educators. And part of what he talks about is the failure to teach about the history of slavery in this country. And what he says is that the role of the teacher, and he's using teacher, I think, both literally because he's speaking to a group of educators, but also in a sort of metaphorical sense to talk about like society at large. The role of the teacher is to help like Black children understand that although the world will tell them over and over and over again that they are criminal, that it is in fact the society and the history that has created the conditions that Black child is growing up in that is actually the criminal, right? And it's like very simple and very intuitive, but it's so important and something that so many of our young people miss today, right? I think about my own time as a high school English teacher and how deeply so many of my students had internalized these messages about who they were and what their community was like, because no one had given them the toolkit or the framework or the language to understand that the reason, Prince George's County, Maryland looks the way that it does, or Washington, D.C. looks the way that it does, and the specific neighborhoods that are saturated with violence and poverty, that violence and poverty is not a reflection of a cultural disposition. It's not reflective of something genetic or biologically inherent. It is reflective of decades and decades and decades of state-sanctioned decisions and policies that have made that community into what it is. And I think when we can, part of what I hope this book can do, and part of what I write at the end is I wanted to write a book that I would have wanted to teach my students, right? And one that would have helped give them some sort of language and framework to understand this specific period of our history, so that they can reclaim a sense of agency, right? Like some people will say like, oh, if you tell Black kids all the time about like oppression and slavery and history and Jim Crow, they'll be overwhelmed. I mean, I think if you teach poorly, that is what will happen.
Sure.
But like, if you do it the right way and you like have a thoughtful, effective pedagogy, I think it will do for those young people what it did for me, is like be this deeply liberating thing and like this deeply emancipatory thing, because you are able to more effectively identify the lies that this country tells you about yourself, right? And you are more able to effectively situate you and your community in the sort of larger history of this country, and understand that, while we all have agency, we all have free will, we are all, in some ways responsible for the decisions that we make, though all of that has to be understood in the sort of larger social and historical context from which it emerges. And that's just so important, because I remember being a kid in New Orleans and being told it was the murder capital of the nation, and we had the highest prison rate, higher prison rates than Russia and China and Iran, and telling all these stories that made me feel, as a kid, when I didn't have the language to push back against it, I was like, well, is there something wrong with us? Like, is there? And it's so insidious and it's so cruel. And that's why it's so important that we push back against all this stuff that's happening now around critical race theory and these state legislatures that are trying to make it so that we don't teach honest accounts of our history.
Okay, I'm going to ask you just a few more questions that are less related to the book and more related to your process. First of all, because everyone listening can tell that you're obviously a very smart human being, it is important to all of us to know what is a word you can never spell correctly on the first try. And before I let you answer, I also read your book of poetry and I happen to see that you love spelling. And so I almost didn't ask you this question, but there's got to be at least like one or two words that you always mess up.
Oh, man. Well, the book gives a distorted sense of my love for spelling because I loved spelling bees as a child. I was like very competitive as a child.
But you were good at it. You like
I was good
spelling.
at it because I would not accept. So that we in PE we would like run to the fence and back every Wednesday or whatever. And there was this one kid who always beat me, and I was like, well, if I'm always getting second place in running, like I've got to be the best in the spelling bee. And so I like practice. It was too much. But like so I was like, I can't be the fastest, so I'm going to spell the best. And so I but I also very rarely won the spelling bee. I always got like second or third. So I was like toward the top. But the story of my elementary school was like number 2, second place Clint.
Sorry.
Now, you know,
you went to Harvard, so fuck those people. Like, I don't know.
Oh, man. What is a word that I can't spell? What is a word that I can't spell?
I hate when people do this because that means they can spell everything. And I'm sitting over here just being like, I spell everything wrong.
There's so many. I mean, like the little squigglies have messed me. I have so many things on Microsoft Word that are on autocorrect. So like I don't even know when I'm spelling something wrong. I would say I listen to your podcast so much. I should have prepared for this question.
Clint Smith, world's best speller.
No, not at all. I mean, the things, just generally things I don't know. This is like a sidestepping answer, but like when things have a hyphen in the middle of them or not.
Like nonfiction. I just learned that because of the stupid podcast.
Does nonfiction have?
I don't think so. I don't do it with fiction with the hyphen anymore. I mean, but I used to.
Like, does nonfiction have a hyphen? Does I've been talking about pre-orders for this book for so many months. No. Like, does pre-order have a hyphen?
No hyphen.
It doesn't have a hyphen. So look, this counts.
Yeah, no, that totally
I don't know
counts.
what has a hyphen, and I don't know.
Well, then there's words like wrap up, where a wrap up versus wrapping something up, one has a hyphen and one doesn't. One is two words, like
a wrap up.
Yeah, or two wrap up.
Oh, yeah. Or even words. So even words that are like, so both the hyphens and when words that could be one word, like prepositions, also could be two words, like into.
Yes.
Like, when do I use into? Right. And then when do I use into?
Or what about cannot and can't? I don't know the difference. I don't know the difference, so I always use can't.
There you go.
Even though when I speak, I always say I cannot with this or I cannot with that. Like super hyperbole.
But even whenever I combine cannot, I'm like, this feels too fancy. I don't know why it feels fancy. It like CANNOT feels somehow like more sophisticated than like CAN space NOT.
Yes.
I don't know why.
Yeah, I'm with you. It's definitely
so
fancier.
There we go. It's definitely like hyphens and what words should be two words versus one word.
That's fine. We'll accept that answer. Okay, this is a question that everyone is waiting for, which is, how do you write? Where are you? Are there snacks and beverages? Don't leave that part out. Do you have music, rituals, a candle, a vibe? Like, what is your writing life look like?
Yeah, so as you know, I have two small children.
Yes.
I have a 2-year-old, and then by the time this podcast is out, he'll be a 4-year-old. 2-year-old daughter, 2-year-old, and 4-year-old son. And they are delightful. The lights of my life. The best thing that's ever happened.
I know where this is going.
I feel like every parent knows. And they, it is, I don't know. It's interesting because this writing experience for this book has taken place over the course of 4 years, and my son's about to turn 4. So like I can't disentangle being the parent of a young child and then young children from writing this book. So I don't actually know what it would like to write a book when you don't have a baby and you're not sleep deprived and you're not. So I think I was quickly disabused of any notion that I would have like a regular time period in which to write, a regular space in which to write. And so much of the writing of this book was done literally with like my child on my chest. For so long, my daughter would only sleep in I forgot what you call the wraparound. Like, it's the thing that
the snoo.
It's the wrap. It's not the snoo, but the thing on your chest.
The swaddle. The Baby Bjorn.
The Baby Bjorn. It's like the Baby Bjorn. It's not that brand. I forgot what
Solely wrap.
Yeah, it's like you wrap it around, and they're like, and so I'd have to like bounce her up and down, and that was the only way she fell asleep for like half her life up to this point.
Oh my god!
And so much of my writing, I've pictures is like me. I'm like bouncing. I create a standing desk out of like random books, and then I'm sort of like gently bouncing up and down as this child is sleeping on my chest. And if I stop bouncing, she'll wake up. So I'm kind of like bouncing as I type. And I had a conversation with the amazing writer and scholar Imani Perry a few years ago, who has her own, who's just so prolific and also has two children who were very young, early in her career. And she was just like, Clint, we were at lunch one time, and she said, Clint, you gotta let go of this idea that like you're gonna have your incense and your candles and your like favorite tea, and that you'll be able to do yoga before, and the sun will be hitting you just right. She's like, you just got like, if you can get 15 or 20 minutes in, right? Like then that is enough. And like that adds up. And so I really took that to heart. And, I would bring my laptop with me everywhere. Like if my kids fell asleep in the back of the car, we'd pull over at CVS, and like I would, write as long as I could until they woke up. I wrote during episodes of Sesame Street. I wrote during nap time. I wrote, and then the pandemic happened, and they were here, and there was like no childcare.
Right.
And so, my wife has been incredible throughout this. This book would not be possible without her. So, she would work really hard to make sure that I had time to write and to finish the edits. And so all of that's a long way of saying I don't have any sort of rituals around writing.
But do you have snacks or beverages that you like?
Do I have snacks or beverages? I love clementines.
Oh my God, not a healthy snack.
No, it's a clementine, but it tastes like candy. It tastes like candy. It's delicious. The candy of the earth.
You live near Jason Reynolds, right? You guys are near each other.
He lives in DC.
Yeah. This must be a DC thing where you only like healthy snacks over there.
Oh man,
what a nightmare!
Don't do that to clementines. They might be healthy, but they are like lollipops. They're just like lollipops. They're like Jolly Ranchers.
I feel like, do you work for the Clementine lobby over here? They're like candy.
I'm trying to get my Clementine sponsorship.
I love it. Okay. We're not going to have time to talk about soccer, but just so everyone knows, Clint and I both like soccer and basketball. And Clint went to college with my superstar basketball player, Steph Curry, at Davidson, right? Do you know him?
Yeah.
Are you friends with him?
Yeah. He's definitely a friend. Before the pandemic, whenever I was in the Bay Area, we would try to get together. I would try to.
So you've met Riley Curry? His daughter?
I've never met Riley, actually.
Oh,
she's
my favorite
because we
Curry.
only see each other. It's amazing to think about. I saw a picture of her the other day.
She's like 45 now.
I was like, I remember when you were just a little baby taking the microphone during press conferences. Oh my God.
She's an icon.
A meme legend.
She's an icon of my heart. Obviously she's the most interesting Curry, everyone's favorite Curry, the most spunk, the most personality. It's her and then the mom and then Steph.
And then everybody, the poor other kids.
Yeah, and then I'm like, Callie Curry, you're married in now. The dynasty of the Rivers Curry family.
It's a whole crew.
And they like play on each other's teams.
I know, it's wild because doesn't the brother-in-law plays on
Damian Lee? Is that the brother-in-law?
I think so.
He's married to Slide. We have a nickname for
Sidell.
We have a nickname for her in our family that's not her name. That's like an inside joke, but that's what I call her. It's not even mean. It's just we've added letters. But anyways, she is married to Steph's teammate, and then Austin Rivers' sister, Callie Rivers, is now married to the brother Curry.
Oh man, I didn't even realize that.
So Doc and Austin are married in to the Curry Empire, the new Empire of Pain, the Empire of Splash.
The new Empire of Pain, the Empire of Splash. So many Chef Currys.
Too many chefs in the kitchen. And then Aisha actually cooking things curry. But the point is that Clint will be back so we can do a full sports podcast because we have to talk deep Premier League, even though I'm like a newbie to Premier League in the last few years. But I'm just it's a hard time to be an Arsenal fan. Old school throwback. Have you always been an Arsenal fan?
Yeah, I was. For the folks who are familiar with the Premier League, I was tricked into cheering for Arsenal because I loved Thierry Henry. Okay. I was like obsessed. Thierry Henry, for those who don't know, is this French Martinique French. His parents are from the island of Martinique. He was born and raised in Paris, I believe, and he's just is this like Arsenal legend, French legend, won the World Cup with France when he was just 19, I think. And I had posters of Thierry Henry on like every wall in my room growing up. And so the Arsenal, who he played for, was incredible in like the early 2000s. I mean, we were the first team in Premier League history to go an entire 38 game season undefeated.
Wow.
And that was the 2003 season. Wow. I think it was 2003, 2004. And I was, after that, I was just like, this is my team. This is my crew. And then it was downhill. And in the last few years, since the old manager retired a few years ago, Arsene Wenger, who we really took for granted. I mean, we're going to have to have a whole nother conversation because I took that man for granted. I was like, let's get it. We need some new blood. Let's get him out of here. And then now I'm like, oh man, those were the good old days. But it has been rough. We are not, I think we're 10th in the league right now. And I remember complaining about being third. I was like, third place. Like, we need to, and now I would just, the things I would do for third place. Yeah. So it's, I've stayed an Arsenal fan, and sports are fascinating because like, I am so deeply emotionally invested in this team in ways that don't actually make logical sense, but reflect, I think, the ways that team and that person shaped my childhood.
Sure.
And also the sort of communities, both online and in person, that are formed like through this sport in ways that are just remarkable. I studied abroad in Senegal, and I remember I had a Arsenal jersey on, and I was living in this small village in eastern Senegal. And when I got there, this little kid came up to me and he told me in French, and he was like, Arsenal is my favorite team. Oh. I love your jersey. And then he invited me to come play with him and his friends. Oh. And then they invited me to come eat with their family. And then I'm like, and it truly, I mean, some cliches are cliche for a reason because they're just true. Right. But like soccer is just the way that it opens doors and creates community anywhere you go in the world. I've always just been so amazed by it. And that's been true everywhere I've gone in the world. You can find people playing a game of football, and that is such a beautiful, incredible thing, or I'm in DC at a random bar watching an Arsenal game with a bunch of strangers, and I would like to say that we're celebrating together, but we were probably crying and commiserating on one another's shoulders.
Well, that's the thing about sports is like, and I've noticed that with soccer because, long story short, my brother is very into soccer and he's a big Man City fan. And so originally he wanted us all to get into soccer, his wife, my husband, myself. And so we each picked different teams. We each picked an A team and then a B team. So my A team originally was Arsenal because I just picked them because I liked Aubameyang. I thought that was a great name. Aubameyang gang. Hello. That's my
Aubameyang gang.
And then my backup team was Bournemouth because I thought that was funny.
Oh, but that's a choice.
Yeah, we all had weird backups. Like Sarah's was Crystal Palace. I think my husband's was Watford. I don't know. We all had weird backups. Okay. But Brady, my brother, was so into Man City, and he made us watch that Amazon documentary about them. And this was at the beginning of the pandemic. He made me watch it, and I loved it so much. I fell in love with Pep Guardiola. How could you not?
Oh,
and then it was like, I don't want to root for any other team because now I love these people, and these are my friends, and they're my brothers in arms, and Phil Foden is one of our own. And like, I'm just here for all of these people. And so everyone in our family, at least the four of us plus my kids, all got team player names. So I'm Mama Sterling after Raheem Sterling. My oldest twin, Ezra, he's Ezra De Bruyne because when he was a baby, he kind of looked like Kevin De Bruyne. So we do the Kevin De Bruyne chant for him, and he knows it's his chant, and he screams and puts his hands up.
Gosh.
And my brother is Pep Bradiola. So like we all have our own things. And so now it's become like this huge family, like, so we all dress up in our costumes whenever we watch together.
Oh my gosh. I'm about to text my family group chat and be like, we need to step it up.
You guys need to step it up because, and so Quentin, my younger twin, he looked a lot like Vincent Company. But Vincent Company never played during Quentin's lifetime. And so originally his jersey says Company, but we've decided because I always get Kevin De Bruyne and Zinchenko confused, we've decided that Quentin is now Quinchenko because that's obvious and they're the twins. But I'm also very anti it because like they're the two white guys on the team and I'm like saying my black kids are them, but it just works so great. So anyways, that's how we have gotten into soccer, and it's very weird and inside, but it makes it funny. And every day I text my brother the lineup that I think that Pep should pick. It's never right, but it's based on my vibes.
Pep is, talk about a genius.
Oh my God. And how could you not love him? He's so funny. He's such a weird, quirky guy.
I had to stop watching the documentary because I was like, my allegiance is about to change.
Oh my God.
I don't think I ever got past episode 3.
Oh, well, it only gets better.
I know.
It only gets better.
It would have gotten too good. And so I was like, I need to hold off because I'm already on thin ice.
Oh my God.
Arsenal's already on thin ice with me. So,
you need to write a book about sports so that we can do this again and fully go deep dive sports. And people who are here listening about history aren't like, I want to kill myself. I'm turning this off immediately.
What kind of transition is happening?
I have to ask you 2 more questions.
Let's do it.
And then we can be done. One is for people who love this book, your book, How the Word is Passed, what are some books you might recommend to them that are in conversation with or are good other things to kind of vibe? I know you've mentioned some things already too.
Yeah, I would read David Blight's The Prophet of Freedom, about its biography of Frederick Douglass. I would read Annette Gordon Reed's The Hemingses of Monticello, about Thomas Jefferson and Sally Hemings and really the entire Hemings family. I would read Their Price for a Pound of Flesh by Dinah Ramey Berry. I would read The Myth of the Black Confederates, I think is what it's called, by Kevin Levin. I would read The Slavery in New York by Leslie Harris and Ira Berlin. Many Thousands Gone by Ira Berlin, which is just like an amazing survey of the history of slavery. I would read Race and Reunion by David Blight. There's so many. Those are a few.
Okay.
Yeah, I think it's also important for me to say, like, this book only is what it is because of the historians whose scholarship has like transformed my understanding of slavery. And so, I hope that people will be, who might be reading about slavery in depth for the first time with my own book will be encouraged to go to a lot of the places that I cite a lot of the books that I cite in my bibliography and in my notes. Because one of the things that I love is that the work of these academic historians is so important to and in conversation with the work of the public historians who I lift up in the book. You know, like the folks at Monticello and the folks at Whitney and the folks in New York and the folks in Galveston, like their work is only possible because of the years of work that these academic historians have spent in the archives. And I think sometimes people like pit them against one another, like, a public historian or an academic historian, and I think it's so important to think about the ways that it's a symbiotic relationship. Like both need one another and both make the work of the other possible. Like more people are encountering Annette Gordon Reed's work when they go to Monticello than they might at any other place. The people who give the tours at the Whitney are spending more time with the books on the history of slavery than a lot of graduate seminars.
Right.
And so I think it's we're so lucky to have so many different types of historians in the world who are doing so many different types of work and doing their best to like bring these stories to life and bring them to as many people as possible. Yeah.
I love that. Okay. Last one. If you could have anyone dead or alive read your book, who would it be?
I know we talked about like, Frederick Douglass was great and all, but like we shouldn't only focus on Douglass. I still, if I could have one person read my book, I would just want to know what Frederick Douglass thinks. I'd be like, do you think I'm a good writer? I'm trying to do you
want to
be
proud. Friends?
Can you please be my friend? Oh man. I mean, he's a legend.
Yeah.
He's a legend. So I think I would probably, given the subject matter and just the way that he, as a thinker, as a philosopher, as a writer, has shaped the way I understand American history, I would have to say Frederick Douglass.
I love that. That's a perfect answer. Everybody at home, this has been a conversation with Clint Smith, soccer fan extraordinaire, historian, poet, writer, host of Crash Course, which is a history course online that you can take. It's very fun. It's on the internet. It's on YouTube, right? YouTube.
Yep. Crash Course, Black American History.
And I will link to everything we talked about today in the show notes, as you know. But this is Clint. His book is called How the Word is Passed. It is out on June 1st, which means you can get it now wherever you get your books. Clint, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you so much for this conversation. It was so fun.
Yay. And everyone else, we will see you in the stacks. Thank you all for listening, and thank you so much to Clint for being my guest. I'd also like to thank Katie LaSalle and Michael Tackins for making this interview possible. Our June book club pick is The Undying, a meditation on modern illness by Anne Boyer. We will discuss the book on Wednesday, June 30th, right here with Michael Denzel Smith. Please make sure you're subscribed to The Stacks wherever you listen to your podcasts, and if you're listening through Apple Podcasts, be sure to leave us a rating and a review. For more from The Stacks, follow us on social media at The Stacks Pod on Instagram and at The Stacks Pod _ on Twitter, and check out our website, thestackspodcast.com. Sebastian Alcala is our sound editor and producer. Our graphic designer is Robin McCrite, and our theme music is from Tagirajis. The Stacks was created and produced by me, Tracy Thomas.